Today we're tying up the Shad Fry Wiggler. I developed this pattern to dive and wiggle and get the attention of largemouth bass and panfish. In certain conditions, it works great. We're going to start out with a Fulling Mill 6040 streamer stripper hook. And we're going to use 3/0 white monocord from Danville. Starting out here, I'm going to seat the thread a little bit too far forward on the hook. We really want to give ourselves quite a lot of space at the front of the hook bend, or right behind the hook eye, that is, in order for the foam to be able to sit at the correct angle so that this thing dives well and wiggles well. Now we're going to take some white marabou. This is Spey blood quill marabou. I like the long stringy type of marabou for tails on baitfish patterns. A little less fluffy, wiggles better. So we'll tie that in the hook shank. Again, not going forward of that point that we tied in at. Now we're going to take some white, I believe this is 3mm foam, and cut some off that is approximately, I don't know, like a little bit longer than the shank of the hook. The width of this needs to be fairly wide, and this hook, it's about 2/3 of the hook gap. And we're going to trim that down at an angle, make it a little triangle out of it, so that we have a thin tie-in point to tie in at the back of the hook. But you want to keep the front end of that pretty wide, and the reason for that is that at the final step, when you poke a hole in it and put it over the hook eye, you don't want it to break because it's the last step and you'll have to start over if it does. So I do a quick measurement, make sure that it's going to give me enough space to be able to stretch it, push it over the hook eye. We're going to tie in a little bit of UV polar chenille in UV pearl, just to add a bit of flash to the body. This is a fun fly to fish, by the way. When it's working well, you'll be able to see it just under the surface, wiggling and coming back up, floating back up when you pause it, and you'll see fish giving chase to it and hopefully eating it. So little twitches and so forth can be deadly. When you see a fish come up behind it but it hesitates, give it a little twitch and a wiggle, and sometimes it'll just suck it down. Okay, so we just kind of preen that back as we wrap it forward, just like the typical chenille style, you know. Okay, so we're going to use some Misty Blue Steve Farrar's Flash Blend. This is really cool stuff. It is a really translucent and flashy. Quite a few strands of this, and the reason for this blue is to go down the lateral line on both sides of this fish and give it that blue accent that shad fry have on their body. And we're going to pull it tight and clip it off just behind the tail. So it's kind of the full length of the fish. Now we're going to take some hollow gray bruiser blend from Fly Fish Food, and we're going to tie that in as the back with the fold over technique that is just like how you would tie a baby fat minnow. So we'll place that on top about halfway. You'll notice that I kind of preened it out a number of times so that all of the fibers are fairly even and I'm not going to lose a whole bunch when I comb it out or pull it out. So I laid down a bit of a thread base there and then fold over on top of that thread base, because this thread base here is going to be where the eyes wind up seated. Okay, and I'm going to flip it over and I'm going to do the same thing with some white bruiser blend. Give it a white belly. And I'm going to preen it out and even up all the fibers so that I don't lose a bunch when I comb it out. Kind of guide that around the hook. Get about the halfway point, fold it over. So it gives me good coverage down both sides. And then again, I'm going to get some thread wraps going to lay down that thread base there. I don't mind thickening up this thread base here quite a bit because, again, this is going to be what I flatten down and attach the stick-on eyes to. All right, now I'm going to actually add quite a few wraps. I love the 3/0 monocord for this because it builds bulk quickly. So just add some bulk to that. Throw a few whip finishes on here. Get lucky with the second one. It almost comes loose on me. And then I'm going to use my flat nose pliers to flatten out that head so that the eyes will be easier to attach. Take my curved flat nose pliers. Flatten that, not too hard or you'll break your thread. Hard enough so it flattens real good. I'm using 7/32 inch silver holographic eyes here. I really like the Super Pearl ones if I'm doing any kind of a colored head. Because the color shines through the translucent Super Pearl eyes. But in this case, silver's fine. So I'm using a little bit of Solar's thin UV resin here. And I'm going to put a dab up between the eyes at the top. That'll really seat them. And then do the same thing at the bottom so that the eyes are properly seated before I finish the resin head. Okay, now I'm just going to repeat the process, add some layers of resin to the top and the bottom, and then the sides. Just gradually build up that head, because if you apply a whole bunch of resin all at once, and it's going to be messy for one thing, but it's also going to be way harder to cure 100% of the way through with your light. So thin little layers work best. I'm going to use some UV clear fly finish, the Loon Flow product. And the reason for this is just to give it a nice tack-free shiny finish. And then the last step here is going to be pulling that piece of foam forward and getting it over the hook eye without breaking it. Bring all these fibers back and just, I don't want anything getting trapped forward, and kind of eyeball where I'm going to poke the hole. And then I'm going to heat up my bodkin. Hot bodkin works way better for poking holes in foam. You're going to get a nice clean hole that you can hopefully fit over the hook eye. Poke the hole right behind where the hook eye is. And stretch it forward. Oh, before we do that, we need to put some super glue up on the hook shank at the front so that once we stretch that piece of foam over, then it's going to lock into place and it's not going to spin on us while we're casting or while we're fishing it. Now I don't do a whole lot of trimming while it's on the vise. I like to leave it pretty wide. Some trimming and some adjustment might be done on the water if this doesn't swim perfectly. It's kind of hard to get it just right, just perfect while it's on the vise and you're looking at it. And once you get it in the water, it kind of swims sideways or something, and you might have to use your clippers and trim a little bit off the foam on the left or the right. Get a little bit more of an angle going on the front to get it to wiggle properly. But I do even it up a little bit while it's on the vise and kind of. But again, leaving a whole bunch of margin to be able to trim while I'm on the water. It's a lot easier to take away materials than put them back. Okay, so I'll show you what it looks like from the front. And then I almost forgot to record. I'm going to use a Prismacolor red pen. These are nice and waterproof. So I'm going to mark some gill flare using the red pen. I've used Sharpies and they seem just to bleed. I'll lose my color after a while. Now Prismacolor black pen, I'm going to use the broad end on this to create the black spot that's just up behind the gill plate on both sides of a shad fry. I found it's easiest, I don't know, maybe there's a better way, but if I pull the material tight and then just kind of stipple at it, I can get a nice solid mark. There we go. That, my friends, is the Shad Fry Wiggler. Hopefully it'll generate a bunch of attention for you. And I think that it would also be really cool to tie in a bunch of different colors. Like I'm thinking like for a Pass Lake minnow that dives and wiggles, that would work really well with like some olive back and white body, or white belly, that is. There you go. Have fun and tight lines.